It's your Locked On Flyers podcast for Monday, April 10th, your daily dose of Flyers news, analysis, and high quality content that does not like records being set on Flyers ice, Russ.
Oh, there was worse than that happened. Much
Yeah,
worse.
we are going to talk about the two games from this weekend. We'll get into the Jay O'Brien situation as well as the Frozen Four results and name our Nemesis of the week. A lot to talk about all on today's show.
You're Locked On Flyers, your daily podcast on the Philadelphia Flyers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, I am Rachel Donner. You can find me on Twitter at rmiriam. I'm here as always with Russ Cohen, who is on Twitter at Sportsology. Thanks for making us your first listen every day. You can follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at Locked On Flyers. That is where you'll keep up to date on all of our episodes. And you should subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to get the latest episode as soon as it's available here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by HelloFresh. Skip trips to the grocery store and count on HelloFresh to make home cooking easy, fun, and affordable. That's why it's America's #1 meal kit. Go to HelloFresh.com/NHL60 and use that code NHL60 for 60% off plus free shipping. Russ, before we dig into the weekend games against the Islanders and Bruins, we got semi-official word via Elliot Friedman and 32 Thoughts that Jay O'Brien was definitely not going to sign with the Flyers. And that's something we had talked about over the course of the last several months that Russ, you especially thought they should sign him. I thought it was, a 50-50 decision, but I think signing him would have at least been a known entity versus the unknown quantity or quality of a draft pick in the second round. But there has been some consternation about this for sure.
Yeah, I just don't think they had any interest in signing him. Zero. And so it didn't shock me. We've talked about it and at a few different shows. So I wasn't surprised. I still have the tack, and I still am taking the tack that I would have tried to sign him because they need centers. He had a good tournament. He scored a big goal on a
He
deflection
did.
where, some fans were like, well, anybody could have done that. Well, the Flyers don't have anybody that goes to the net. So we could start there. Not everybody could do that. He plays really good defense. He basically played anywhere they wanted him to in that lineup. But again, people were looking at it as a negative, like, well, he wasn't a top liner and Devin Kaplan was. No. He would move around. He was moving around, so was Devin Kaplan. But you know what? He had a better tournament than Devin Kaplan. I mean, it's
Yes,
just
he did.
there were positive things that he did that fans just want this pick and they just like, we'll take the pick. Even though the pick is a 40% chance and you won't see it for 4 years. But okay. I mean, that's fine.
Yeah, speaking of the pick, we still do not have any certainty over when this pick would be, whether it be this season or next year's draft. There is a process by which Jay O'Brien can file for free agency earlier in the summer that would allow the Flyers to get the 19th pick in the second round this year. But until that happens, it is not certain. So just want to make sure that's clear. But I mean, given this situation, the best hope would be for the pick to be in this year's draft. But again, until there's some I's dotted and T's crossed, that is not set in stone yet.
True.
All right, switching gears back to the Flyers. Tony DeAngelo scratched 3 games in a row, even to the point where the Flyers only iced 5 defensemen in the game against the Bruins. And John Tortorella has been a little cagey about it, just saying, well, I'm just doing it. And he said, oh, I haven't talked to him about it.
Well, he
And
may not have.
Yeah, I mean, that could very well be the truth. I have no reason to doubt that, but at the same time, that is very concerning in terms of, just having bodies for the Flyers defense for next season. If this is an indication that he's one of the have-nots in the reckoning of who's going to be part of the Flyers moving forward.
Well, I think there's a pretty good indication that he probably is. Um, my guess, and again, when a coach doesn't say what's going on, he leads us to speculate. My guess is he probably said to somebody or talked to somebody, coach, player, whatever, and maybe talked about his dissatisfaction with being scratched because, he's D'Angelo's come out before and said, you know, he doesn't like it and he's not going to talk about it, and that's fine. And so he doesn't do it publicly, but I'm sure he spoke to somebody. I would be pretty sure of that. And maybe that didn't work well with the coach. And we don't know if we'll see him again this season. Like, we don't know.
Yeah, it's a giant question mark for me. And if he's sort of in the doghouse with John Tortorella, again, presuming he sticks around next year, what does that mean for the amount of cap
Well,
money going into him and
it means
the
they're going to
lineup?
try and move him, but they'll have to eat some salary and,
Yeah.
whatever. I mean, at this point, they gave up a lot of picks for him. It hasn't worked out great. And they're probably going to try and move on. That's my guess. I mentioned Arizona as a team because, they don't have Chikrin anymore. They don't have Gostisbehere anymore. So they might be willing to take somebody who could run their power play for a year. And if they do, they probably would want to, get them as cheap as they can, unless they have to get to the cap floor. Then maybe they would take them at full salary, but then it would cost the Flyers something. So, you know how all this works. And
Yep.
we'll just have to wait and see what happens with it. But it's certainly something that you wish the coach would at least comment on
Right.
because, you know, at the end of the year, when you're trying to evaluate where a team is at, this is an important part of it. So right now, all we could say is the Tony DeAngelo experiment here has failed. That's not on Tortorella. That's on Chuck Fletcher, but it's still an organizational thing.
Yeah. I do want to talk about goaltending in these two games, but first let's like kind of go up about 30,000 feet for these two games. And they just felt like very different efforts in terms
Mm,
of the tone of the games, where the Flyers against the Islanders were playing like a team that had absolutely nothing to play for.
yeah,
And
or adrift.
yeah, and they did not against the Bruins. Like, there was effort, and I don't know if they were matching the energy of the Bruins in this one, and the Islanders are just a quieter team in general. But it just felt like even though the Flyers didn't have the skill, clearly, to keep up with the Bruins, that at least the energy and the effort was matching.
Well, it was better. I don't know. It never really matched up, but it was better. And I think it's because it's easier to hate the Bruins than it is the Islanders. So I think, yeah, they got annoyed at times, and I think this was one of the rare times when Delorier had a fight that they all got fired up, and and it did do something for him temporarily. It's all temporary though. Like Torts
Mhm.
talked about it after the game, and he goes, "I want the stat," and I can't believe he can't get it. Like, they have a full analytics department and he doesn't have the stat for how many times they've led in games this season. That's all a guy wants to know, and he can't even find that out. Like, that's a failing of the organizational statistical department. It is, because I believe he's asked for this before, and why can't he get it? Get it to him. We would like to know too.
Yeah, I'm sure it's an easy stat to get that, he's just not getting it at the right time. But yeah, I do think that yeah, that Delorier fight was a little bit more energetic or had a little bit more of an impact than I've seen in previous fights
Right.
there. There was also that moment where Lemieux like lost a couple of teeth. I think
Yeah.
that kind of got
That was
guys.
incidental, that high stick, but it still
Oh,
happened.
sure. Yeah, it was still upsetting when they're,
Oh, yeah.
like, scrambling to look for his teeth out on the
Yeah.
ice.
It was a weird game though. Like energy wise, it was weird. Like here's the things we knew. We knew that Boston was going to come in. We knew they were going to win. We knew Pastrnak was going to get his 60th goal and his 300th career goal. We knew that JVR was probably not going to get his 300th goal, even though he only needs one goal for that. Like these are things that we knew ahead of time, and nothing happened in this game to change that. Matter of fact, Pastrnak had 4 points, and he had a goal taken off the board. So, like, we knew that these things were going to happen, and so again, my thing about this team is, if you want to say there's some resiliency, okay, I'll buy that. But there's very little else that I could talk to you about that I say might carry over for next year. Like, we could say, hey, Owen Tippett scored his 24th. That's good. So some goal scoring from him will carry over next year. But very few players are playing at any kind of level right now. Farabee has picked it up a little bit. Okay, that's a good sign, but Konechny is nowhere near the same guy before the injury. And a lot of the team, Cam York's not playing well. A lot of this team is not playing well. And so to actually evaluate them is near impossible in the sense that to talk about next year. And so,
Right.
I just look at it like this has been just it's more than when the coach just says, hey, with this, there's going to be pain and everything. Yeah, I get it. With pain, I get it. I've seen teams do it. I've watched the Leafs do it. We watch teams do it. But the point is, you still want to see some cohesion there, some sort of gelling in certain areas, and there's very little of that, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of missing pieces here, both skill and intangibles, as they say. And we'll be getting into a lot of that in our off-season discussion coming up pretty soon. We're going to talk more about these weekend matchups coming up next.
Grand slams, no hitters, and double plays are back. And there's no better place to get in on the MLB action than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. That's because right now, new customers can step up to the plate with a no sweat first bet up to $1,000. Just go to fanduel.com/lockedon, sign up, place your first bet, and get up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if you don't win. Maybe bet on Jordan Walker getting another hit. He's got a hit in his first 9 games, first time since 1939. Maybe he'll get 10. See what the odds are. So don't miss your chance to get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to fanduel.com/lockedon to sign up. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball.
All right, Russ. So continuing our discussion of these weekend matchups, I did say I wanted to talk about the goaltending and obviously pulling Carter Hart in the game against the Islanders. John Tortorella said that the reason why he did it was that he had been considering starting Hart versus the Bruins. And so, if he was going to pull him, he was just going to pull him so that maybe he would have the energy to play against the Bruins, but then ultimately decided to put Sandstrom in, which is probably, maybe he should have flipped him to begin with and put Sandstrom in against the Islanders and then Hart in against the Bruins. But
I would have done that simply because I wouldn't have wanted to see the Bruins set that record on my home ice. So just to do that, I would have flipped it.
Yeah, because you have to think if he genuinely thought that he would have a better outcome with Felix Sandstrom, not that Felix Sandstrom played badly at all. I just think
he made some really good saves, but it's just, you could tell it was just going to be too much for the entire game. And remember, the Bruins rested like 5 good players.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was...
We didn't get into that.
I know. That's what makes it hurt, I think, a little bit more, was that they sat all those guys. Now, Taylor Hall was out just still precautionary. You might as well give him another game of rest before he gets back in. But still.
Bergeron, these are big players. McAvoy.
Yeah. I know. They even sat Allmark, as the backup. He wasn't there, which we didn't get the Bruins goalie hug at the end, but that's all right, I guess. We have to take something away from them, I guess. But it was just, I don't know. It was upsetting, more upsetting to me, I think, that the Flyers didn't show up to play defense in front of Carter Hart in the same way that, they attempted to the next night. Weren't successful against the Bruins, let's be clear, but the
But it was
I
more of
just
an
felt like
effort.
the defensive effort just wasn't quite there in front of Carter Hart, and that was part of what went wrong.
Yeah, I mean, there was definitely more of an effort defensively against the Bruins, and for whatever reason why. And you're right, and that part is upsetting. But it's just, again, it kind of goes part and parcel with this team just being uh, very inconsistent, and
Mhm.
you know that's just the way they've been playing. So, but yeah, as far as Sandstrom, I felt bad early on. You knew he was under siege, and he
Mhm.
made some really great saves in the second period.
He did.
But you kind of knew where that was going if the Flyers couldn't, really make a game of it. They got it to 3-2, but still, even then, there wasn't really any worry on the Bruins part. And to be honest, at times, I'm not even sure they were playing their hardest. That's a whole other discussion for another day too. I just think they were kind of getting through it, and they just wanted to come out of there with Pastrnak getting his 60 goals. That was the plan, obviously.
Right. I mean, it is a weird thing because I feel like with the Flyers that it was just all on the defensive side of things that where the problem
Yes.
was for me. That offensively, if you look at both of those games, the Flyers outchanced the Bruins.
Hmm.
They outchanced or they out yeah, they outchanced the Islanders too. They almost doubled up on the Islanders on high danger chances. And it was just, again, this whole lack of finish thing that's bothered them all season. But at the same time, like you got to match that on the defensive side, or else you're never going to win anything. And especially in a Torts system where it's all about team defense and blocking shots. I mean, to be fair, Torts has admitted that the team is not where it had been in terms of effort on the defensive side of things. So at least he notices that. But that's what's bothered me, that if this is the whole thing this season about building this identity and the team can't, stick it out until the end, like, I don't know, man. Like, what does that
Yeah, the
say? And
identity has slipped, like it has. It's the identity's not strong like it was in the beginning of the season, or even maybe at one point when they thought they were still in it later in the season. That identity has certainly slipped, and so that part they're going to have to come to grips with, and figure out who they're keeping, who they're not keeping. And again, there's just a lot of uncertainty. It's one thing to be uncertain about players and signings and player development, but they're still uncertain with management. Like there's just very few things that are even settled with this organization. That's the bad part about it.
yeah, with all this change happening at once, it's definitely like a very weird place to be right now. That pretty much anybody is on the table. I just don't think they're really, except maybe Carter Hart, any untouchables right now. And at the same time, it's like who's making those decisions about who the untouchables are?
Right.
Well, we don't know. So I think just the unknown right now in watching some of these games, it's like, well, who are these guys playing to impress? I don't know that either.
I
So
mean, based on what you saw out of Ivan Provorov, with everybody thinking he had a really bad arm injury, and he probably does, and he comes back to play, he doesn't even miss that many shifts. Um, in these, last few games, you're going to trade that guy? Really? I don't think he can. But we don't know. Like
that's
that's the thing.
that's definitely Provy though. He's that guy. I
Yeah,
mean, he's just always gonna work hard to get
he
back
hasn't missed a
in.
game.
No, no, it would be very weird if that happened. Like, I think he'll do anything to stay in the lineup
Hmm.
at this point, just to at least finish out the season.
Well, I think even
Um,
more. I think he does want to finish out his contract in Philly, and then whatever happens, happens. But I do have that vibe. But we don't know if the team feels the same way about him. I mean, that's the whole thing. Even at the end of the year, they could tell everybody one thing at breakdown day, and then all of a sudden there's either a new GM or a new director of player ops, and then the whole thing changes. It's
Yep,
all there.
lot of questions.
Lot of
Lot of
questions.
questions. Also questionable still the power play. 0 for
No
2 versus
question
the
about that. It sucks.
yeah. 0
It's
for 2 versus the Isles, 0 for 4 versus the Bruins. And honestly, against the Bruins, even one of those being successful would have changed the game.
true. I mean, they did have one of them that looked better, but that was 1 out of
Yeah,
4, and they still didn't get
right.
the puck in. So you're right. Just getting one of those. But again, like, what is going to lead me to believe that that's better next year? What's fixing that?
We don't know. I'll tell you that. It could be personnel, could be coaching, could be neither. And
Or it could be both.
lot of balls in the air with that one. Um, well, we have a lot to talk about for the Flyers' last week of regular season games, including picking our nemesis of the week. We'll do that next, as well as catch up on the Frozen Four. So, Russ, the Frozen Four finished up this weekend, and you called it, man. Quinnipiac wins it all.
Yeah, I didn't call them to win it all, but I did call them to beat Michigan and then have a really good game against Minnesota. But I still thought Minnesota would edge them out. But I think
Mhm.
people just, again, I've covered the ECAC for a long time, right? And they're always the forgotten conference. So
They are.
everybody always wants to talk about the Big Ten and everything else and NCHC and, and nobody wants to talk about the ECAC. But I was getting almost the same vibe, not exactly the same one with Union than I was getting with Quinnipiac
Yeah.
here. And like Union, I did pick to go all the way, and I had that vibe very early in the year because I get to see these teams when I go and cover at Princeton. And the same thing happened with Quinnipiac. And a lot of the same players I talked about were doing great. And Sam Lipkin was one that I was even mad at ESPN not mentioning them for like the first couple goals, and then they started to mention them. But the one thing that I did mention that I think I got right was Rand Pecknold. I said, listen, this guy is a stellar coach.
Oh,
He
yeah.
pointed out his record in conference, out of conference, and you could see the coaching made a difference. And, to me, it made a difference. And Bob Motzko is a very good coach. But the one thing that Rand Pecknold can do in a game is get his team to stick to his game plan and never waver. And they didn't. When they were behind, they never wavered. And when they were ahead, and they weren't ahead a lot, they never wavered. And that's the thing about them is they will stick to that and they'll die with that. And getting that kind of commitment even broke down Minnesota, which was crazy to see because that
It
was a little
was.
shocking. I'll be honest, even though I wasn't shocked by the players that did it because I know their talent and I know the coaching talent and I knew their defense was good. And, man, they just, again, it's not always about what first rounders you have and talent. A lot of that has to do with the team. And yeah, Quinnipiac's a really good team. So they get their first win ever, which was exciting. And I'm really happy for them. I mean, I really was.
Yeah, I think with Quinnipiac, the whole was greater than the sum of its parts,
Yes.
and that's what you have to do in order to win these tournaments and win these championships. As far as Flyers prospects go, Bryce Brodzinski had a secondary assist in the semifinal, but nobody else got on the board for the. Well, Jay O'Brien did, but he doesn't count
Not
anymore.
anymore.
So, not mentioning him there exactly. A couple of draft eligible players just want to touch on. Jackson Nelson actually had a really solid tournament.
You think they'll listen to me, Rachel? I don't.
I
I
don't
don't think
know,
they will.
but he's a free agent available.
Would you want
And
to sign him if you had the opportunity?
yeah. Oh, absolutely. We talked about him on the March 16th show, so go back and listen to our segment on
Yeah,
him.
I would sign
And
him tomorrow.
And then as far as draft eligible, I think we should be talking about Luke Middlestat coming up real soon.
I'm not a fan. He's an offenseman, so
Well, I think we should talk about him though.
we can talk about him. I mean, I've watched him his whole career. I don't love his defense. His skating and his shots real good. So if if you want to get a power play specialist, okay. So if I'm drafting him, where would I draft him? 6th round.
Yeah, well, we will get into that as we are doing our draft prep work. For our nemesis of the week, last week I talked about these jersey tribute games and not being able to tell who's who on the line rushes because everybody's wearing the same number. We had that for Coetzee at home as well as Chris Letang on the road in Pittsburgh. This week, my nemesis is as we are finishing up the season and where the draft lottery percentages are ending up and the Flyers wrapping up their season against the Chicago Blackhawks. The very thought of the Chicago Blackhawks getting Bedard is like my worst nightmare. I do not want this to happen.
So I'll talk about the nemesis for me is that fine line for fans either holding on and eating their tickets or watching their place turn into the other team's barn. And so that's exactly what happened against the Bruins. And the fans for the Bruins that were there were even louder than the Ranger fans. So Jeremy Swayman got way more attention than Felix Sandstrom on some saves with the claps and everything. Pastrnak, when he scored his hat trick, there were a lot of hats on the ice. It wasn't just 1 or 2 or 3. They were getting quite a few. So that was another thing. And the thing that was most startling that you normally only see in the playoffs when you know that a team's going to lose in the conference final and another team's going to advance, the "We Want the Cup," that was really loud. And I was like, wow, I had never heard that for any opposing hockey venue in a regular season in my life. So those are my nemesis, and fans can't complain about it because fans are the ones that sell the seats to the Bruins fans. So
yeah, it is. It's a tough line. I think you're right because these are the games like that Rangers game when they thought maybe Patrick Kane was going to debut. And then this Boston game where Pastrnak could maybe get 60 and they could break their record for wins by the franchise. The games were both on the weekend, so travel is a little bit easier to handle, and especially the way the Flyers have played this season. I cannot blame season ticket holders for trying to sell those on the open market and get some of their money back if, teams are going to,
it's a fine line because then
these particular fans are going to pay a premium for these tickets.
Right. So, and it's again, I don't fault them for it, but if you're going to complain, and we'll see if people do complain. If you do complain, then it's like, well, then you shouldn't have sold the tickets. But if you just sit and take it, then that's what's going to happen. But unfortunately, this is probably going to happen next year to the Flyers fans too. So they're going to have to buckle up for that.
Yeah, and I think that nobody is blaming the fans who are selling their tickets, and nobody, and all of the blame is we don't have a good enough team to warrant wanting to go see.
One blame is when the
that
team
is the blame.
This is what happens.
Yep, absolutely. All right, we are going to wrap things up with a Flyers fun thing. Gritty dressing up as the Easter Bunny, always creepy and weird when Gritty dresses up in a costume like that, but it's also amazing at the same time. So
what was weirder?
That out.
When the Easter Bunny was banging the drum, I was like, really? The Easter Bunny? Like you just had the Easter Gritty as the Easter Bunny. I was like, you couldn't get anybody else. You used the Easter Bunny to bang the drum. That was kind of odd too.
Yeah. All right. We will be back again tomorrow with a preview of our penultimate game against Columbus and give our Phantoms Tuesday check-in. Phantoms have clinched a playoff spot in the Calder Cup playoffs. So thrilled about that. And we're going to talk a lot about that and the matchup scenarios on tomorrow's show. As a reminder, we always want to hear from you. So if you've got mailbag questions, send them in via Twitter at LockedOnFlyers, or you can email us at LockedOnFlyers@gmail.com. I'm Rachel. I'm on Twitter at rmiriam. That's RMIRIAM.
I'm Russ. I'm at Sportsology, SPORTSOLOGY.
Thanks for making Locked On Flyers your first listen today. Now make your next listen Game to Game NHL. It's every moment, every top performance, every result. Locked On Game to Game covers every game from across the NHL with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. It's on your Locked On NHL feed wherever you get your podcasts. Have a great day, everyone.